Hello and welcome to this video lecture, Chapter 15, Project Procurement. So let's get started. For our agenda today, we're going to be, first of all, looking at an introduction to project procurement, sort of what this is and how it relates to project management. Then we're going to look through the major processes of project procurement: make or buy analysis, defining the procurement, choosing the seller, and monitoring the seller's performance. And this will give you a good general overview of project procurement. Now, in terms of the project lifecycle, we've gone through initiating, planning, and executing. Now we come to this thing, project procurement, that runs along the bottom, overlapping with both the planning and the executing phase. And so the initiating phase, regardless of whether procurement is involved or not, is essentially the same. Procurement can affect both the planning and the executing phase. So let's look a little bit more into that as we go forward. So, introduction. Many projects are done completely internally, just within the same organization. Everything's done by the people on the project. However, for many projects, some portion of the work is performed by another organization. It can be a little bit, or it can be a lot. Terms used to describe this work can include outsourcing, purchasing, and project procurement. The terminology of buyer and seller is used. Buyer represents the project that is receiving the work. The seller is the organization that is producing the work. So we're going to use buyer and seller throughout. And the procurement process consists of the following. One, a decision is made. Are we going to buy, or are we going to make it ourselves? That's a make or buy analysis. We need to define the details of the procurement. That's the statement of work in the RFP. Need to choose a seller, and from that we create and sign a contract, a legal contract. And finally, we monitor the seller's performance. And through that, the deliverables are complete and delivered. So that's the overview. And now what we're going to do is follow through that process. The first step in the process is the decision, the make or buy analysis. So for many projects, the decision of whether to produce certain deliverables internally or externally is obvious. Sometimes it's completely obvious that it should be done internally by the organization, or it should be outsourced. But sometimes it's not. It's kind of, uncertain. It may not be obvious. And in these cases, the completion of a make or buy analysis is required. At this point, please turn off, pause this video, and then read the case study update performing the make or buy analysis that you will find on page 174. So do that and then come on back. Okay, so during the make or buy analysis in the case study, what you found is that there was a couple of features that were identified as potentially being done externally. So there was the multimedia demo, and there was social media that were looked at for potentially outsourcing to another organization. And as you saw in the case study, the decision was made to buy for one of them, and to make or just keep it internal for the other. And there's various criteria that was done and so on. That's a make or buy analysis. So that's something that was done. Once we have something that we're going to procure, we'll then proceed on, and that's where the step we're at now, defining the procurement, comes into play. Once the decision has been made to procure the work from outside the organization, such as in the case study, the next step is we need to define the characteristics so that potential sellers can know what they want to propose to you. They're not mind readers. They can't just know what we need. We need to define that. And that consists of two documents. One, the statement of work. This document completely describes the work to be completed. And then secondly, the request for proposal. And this describes the process in detail the prospective sellers will use to submit the proposal. So again, recommended that you pause this video and listen to the defining the procurement video case study within the textbook. Now, during this case study, you would have seen the next step, and by closely reading the textbook, you'll have seen that the statement of work and case study and RFP were created or were in process of being created for the DecoCam project. The statement of work defines various things about the project. It's things like the specifications of the work to be completed, the required quantity, the quality or level of performance, the period of performance, everything about the work to be completed, the details of the specifications, and so on. All of that goes into the statement of work. The request for proposal provides all of the details regarding as to how the prospective sellers should submit, including required information, the format of their proposal, number of copies, and the date and time that the proposal must be submitted. It's included with the statement of work, as well as if there's any specific contractual provisions that are needed and so on. And how another thing that's indicated is how the buyer will evaluate the seller. So the evaluation criteria is included as well. Now, once that's done, once the statement of work and RFP are created, they're sent out to prospective sellers. So they are distributed so that other organizations are aware and then can submit proposals to us. So at this stage, potential sellers are identified from a number of sources. Sources that include our knowledge of the environment, our past experience. We may talk to consultants. We may do research through industry periodicals, through Google, through internet searches, and so on. So we do all this to identify sellers, and then once we identify them, and we may come up with a short list, or may refine the list as to who do we think would be the choices. They're sent the procurement documents. Special note that if it's a public project and so on, we can't necessarily limit the number. We need to actually advertise and make it open to anyone that wants to bid and so on. So there's special rules around public or government projects. But once identified, once we know who the sellers are, we send them the procurement documents. The prospective sellers, those that receive those documents, they'll examine them, they'll review them, and they'll create proposals that are sent back to the buyer as defined by the rules in the RFP. So they will read the RFP and they'll find out the date and format and so on, and they'll develop a proposal. They're trying to convince the buyer that they should be the one to be selected. The buyer selects the winning proposal and awards the contract. Now, at this point, please again pause the video and go to the Choosing the Seller case study update, which you'll find on page 179, and then come back here. Okay, so now that you're back from that, you've seen the process of evaluation that takes place. So you saw the actual case study play out. Now, one of the things that you'll have noticed is that there was an evaluation of seller proposals, where you saw that there was a weighted evaluations done in terms of the criteria of quality, cost, and seller reputation. And you saw that the three organizations that were trying to bid on the work were evaluated, and that one was ultimately selected. So that's what happens in that case. Once the a seller is selected, then a contract is developed and signed. And that contract is a key thing that is done, that is created, and that then guides the rest of the work to be done. The last step is, now that the contract's in place, is the monitoring of the seller's performance. Once the contract has been created, the seller begins to work on the project deliverables as defined by the contract. And that's one key thing. One of the key things that differentiates procurement work from internal work is the existence of a legal contract. It's very, very key. The buyer needs to, at this point, their involvement. They're not creating the work, but they monitor the progress of the work being performed. They verify the deliverables, and they manage issues and changes, very similar to how we saw earlier in the course. Now the question becomes, what if there is a disagreement between the buyer and seller? It's now two organizations, and there are not necessarily agreed upon remedies for that, and that's where it's important to understand that there is a legal contract involved, and there are specific approaches that can be made. Recommend reading the paragraph at the top of page 181 of your textbook, and that'll describe some of the things that can happen if there is a disagreement between the buyer and the seller. There's the references for this video lecture. Thanks for watching.